2030.
Saudi Arabia, the Point of Investment Fund,
It's a
there's
big
a lot of
vision.
excitement
This
around
transformational
NEOM specifically.
change. Every aspect of the kingdom, economic, social, cultural, religious.
The 2030.
This is the 2030.
Yalla, 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 yalla.
Hello, Allah Doctor. It is the 2030 episode 18. How are you? Happy 4th of July, belated to you. What's up?
I'm good. How are you? Happy 4th. How's the celebration been?
It's been great. It's been really long, as you know. We sort of stretched it out here in small town America. Lots of parades, children fun, adult fun as well. It's been great. It's just really hot here in Maryland, but it's been wonderful. And you guys just had an election in the UK. You have been celebrating the 4th of July. So we are back now to our normal schedule with a little bit of a break last week. This week, we've got a really good episode. We're going to do a show. We're going to do a deep dive on the recent IMF report on Saudi Arabia, which you will be leading. And I'm very much looking forward to talking about with you. And then we're going to have a really good discussion of some of the latest news. There's been a lot happening. The news does not sleep on Saudi Arabia and the region especially. And so there's kind of a lot to get caught up on. Speaking of getting caught up, if you haven't been watching or listening to the 2030 recently, we've had a run of really, really great interviews recently. And I want to read some feedback. This one is from Abdul Mail on YouTube. Interesting coverage of the latest at Tadawul and the changing regulations for the better. Thanks, Mr. Salman Al-Sudairi. Lots of interest is from the MSME sector who are more interested to list with Tadawul. Yeah, that interview with Salman was really great and was very popular on YouTube especially, but also on the audio platform as well. It was really great. And actually, we've had two really good financial-led discussions recently. Obviously, Salman was one of them. And your husband, Aziz, was the most recent one, and he was fantastic. And we are now kind of this week going through and putting some of the segments out of that conversation. And it's really cool because he is a hedge fund manager in London and is a Saudi. And kind of the story arc there is that for the longest time, people were like, why aren't you investing in Saudi? Why are you focused more on global markets? And he basically said the market isn't ready yet. And now pretty much it is, due to the transformation, which is the story we're talking about here. So thank you, and thank Aziz for joining us. That was a really good conversation. If you missed it, it's on our YouTube channel. You can find it where you're listening to this as well. Just terrific stuff.
Yeah, it's great. The guests that have been on have extensive knowledge in the region, in the country, and are, really bringing in some great expertise to the show. So I know that we try and keep our conversations a little bit general in order to capture kind of a lot of different stories and a lot of different threads and narratives of the transformation that's happening. So it's great to bring on guests that can really go into the specifics of some of this transformation and how they've watched it unfold over time. So, we even had earlier conversations with some of our guests on, the history of the banking sector with Ramzi Abu Khadra. We've talked about history in general with Ghada Mhanna Belkhail, and she, obviously contributed some great content around Hajj season and how that's been visually depicted over time. And there's just so much more to come. Like, I'm so excited about the guests that we have coming on in the next couple of episodes and, what we have coming up in the next few months. So it's just been a really fun journey so far.
It's been really fun. And what's really cool is it's really just the beginning. And it's really nice to see it in the market and having such a strong start. Our YouTube channel is doing especially well. We are very grateful for everybody that is subscribing to us there. Please, if you haven't yet and you're interested in seeing this stuff or getting it in your email inbox, you can do that as well at the 2030.beehive, beehiiv.com. We're working on getting that URL switched over to our main URL, but that's, if you can subscribe to us there, we sort of send all of our content out once or twice a week, kind of whenever it's ready to go and whenever there's something really interesting to share, which is frankly every day if you're following us on social media. So do that there. I want to read one more. This is from Trimex 1694 on YouTube. I've been looking to learn more about the history of the Gulf and the Arab world at large, and I've read several books, I read news, etc., but most of it is written by Westerners in English, and finding Arab views is very difficult. When Western news sources cover KSA or UAE in their news coverage, they bring Western analysts, in quote, and no one from the region to discuss the topic. I find very little to no Western sources that have been unbiased, non-negative views of the region. Sources like BBC, NYT, The Atlantic spring to mind. That's what I love about your podcast. Please keep it up, guys. Thank you, Trimex. Very nice to read that. Very cool. We agree. We're a little biased, of course, but that's very, very nice to hear. Dr. Hannah, let's get to a deep dive.
All right. So today for the deep dive, what I wanted to do was kind of bring to light the concluding statement of the 2024 Article 4 mission. It's the IMF findings after an official staff visit to Saudi. And I think it is, it's a pretty dense report. It really does go into all different dimensions of the Saudi economy. But I thought I'd bring it to light on the show and really just talk a little bit about what it highlighted about the Saudi economy and recent economic developments. And it really just summarizes it in the very beginning of the report, where it says that Saudi Arabia's unprecedented economic transformation is progressing well. Prudent macroeconomic policies, transformative changes, including through fiscal reforms and in the regulatory business environment, and strong domestic demand have really helped prop up non-oil growth. Inflation remains contained. Spending reprioritization and recalibration of major spending programs are ongoing. Efforts to diversify the economy have started to bear fruit. Building on these successes, it will be important to sustain the non-oil growth momentum, maintain financial sector stability, continue mitigating risks of overheating, reverse declining total factor productivity, and ensure intergenerational equity. It's a lot of big words. But I think the headline really is that it's all going in the right direction and it's really positive. And I, again, kind of just thinking about some of the feedback that we get about the show on how Western media can be quite negative about what's happening in Saudi Arabia. A lot of what the IMF has reported on in this report is kind of showing how some of these changes, the recalibration of spending, refocusing where, kind of the giga projects are going, and thinking about all of the new fiscal policies that are in place. These are all positives. They're not necessarily negatives. And I think that that's really important to highlight when a global international organization comes in and says, no, these are the right things that you're doing. This isn't an indication of failure. This is an indication of positive economic and sound economic decision making. So it goes on to list quite a few different developments, starting with economic activity and looking at real non-oil as well as oil GDP. So real non-oil growth decelerated from 5.3% in 2022 to a still robust 3.8% in 2023, driven mostly by private consumption and non-oil investment, with the latter tapering off to 11.5%. Down from an exceptional 32% growth in 2022. And oil GDP contracted by 9% in 2023, due primarily to Saudi Arabia's OPEC Plus and voluntary oil production cuts, leading to a 0.8% contraction in overall GDP. So while non-oil growth for Q1 2024 indicates some moderation in economic activity, staff estimates that the output gap remains in positive territory, close to 2% of the non-oil potential GDP. Additionally, they talked about unemployment, which has reached a historic low. We've talked about this before on the show. In 2023, the Saudi economy added over 1 million jobs, primarily in the private sector. Now, this is a question I get all the time. How are we going to get Saudis to start working in the private sector? Aren't they really wedded to their public sector employment? And actually, no, if you look at the trend, we are really adding a lot of jobs within the private sector, and a lot of Saudis are going into the private sector. The overall unemployment rate for Saudis dropped to 7.7% in the last quarter of 2023, inching closer to the 2030 vision objective of 7%. And labor force participation rates have remained at historically high levels. They're relatively flat over the past year for both men and women, but women's rate is still comfortably exceeding the Vision 2030 goal of 30%. So that is, again, one of the success stories that is highlighted when talking about the Saudi economy and the vision and what's happened with women's employment. Inflation has decelerated rapidly despite some pressure pockets as well. So this is, again, when you look at the world and inflation levels that have been very crippling over the past couple of years, within Saudi, it's still looking good. After peaking at 3.4% in January 2023, year-on inflation receded to 1.6% in April 2024, helped by an appreciating normal effective exchange rate. However, rents are growing at a brisk rate of about 10% amid inflows of expatriate workers and large redevelopment plans in Riyadh and Jeddah. Wholesale prices have also edged up recently, reflecting an increase in input costs. So far, some uptick has been observed in the wages of high-skilled workers. It also goes on to talk about the economic outlook and risks for the future. So basically, there's been a recent recalibration of funding requirements associated with the Vision 2030 objectives and some of those giga projects that we've been talking about. Its application led to a spending reprioritization through the acceleration of some projects and sectoral strategies and extension of the timeline for others. This exercise will help ensure proper sequencing of spending aimed at reducing overheating risks and maintaining fiscal and external sustainability. So the IMF staff is of the view that making public the main implications of this exercise, particularly on spending and sectoral priorities up to 2030, will be important to help provide clarity on government priorities to investors and to the public. And I think that's been happening. There's also been, it also reported that domestic demand is expected to remain the main driver of economic activity within the kingdom. Non-oil growth is projected at about 3.5% in 2024 as investment growth moderates before picking up in 2025 onwards, including from the PIF and in the lead up to the 2027 Asian Cup, 2029 Asian Winter Games, and 2030 World Expo. Oil output is projected to contract by 4.6% in 2024, but increase by 5.1% in 2025. Finally, it does also talk quite a bit about fiscal policy. From a fiscal perspective, Saudi Arabia's finances are in a decent position, but they need to take some steps to make them more sustainable in the long run. This will involve finding new sources of income and cutting back on. It had a budget surplus in 2022 for the first time in years, but went back into deficit in 2023. And the main reason for the deficit is higher spending on projects and lower oil revenue, despite a new payment from Aramco. Public debt is still low compared to the size of the economy, though. And looking ahead, the deficit is expected to be around 3% of the economy's size in 2024. And over the next few years, it's likely to stay around that 2.5 to 3% of the economy. And it's because of the government's plans to keep spending on projects, even though non-oil income isn't growing perhaps as fast as they would like it to. However, as we've seen, it's exceeded kind of the expectations. So just relying on oil prices is going to be tricky, and therefore there might be other ways that the government's going to raise money, perhaps through more taxes. Cutting down on subsidies, especially for fuel, would save government money. These are some of the recommendations from the IMF, which are pretty much in line with what they normally recommend. And it could be done by gradually raising prices and helping those who need it most with targeted programs, which again, through some of the reforms within the support systems and the social safety nets, this is something that is already underway within the kingdom. I think, there's a lot more in the report, and I tried to pick up on some of the key things. But generally speaking, some of the comments that were made by our guests in the past couple of episodes were also highlighted within this report from the IMF, talking about the financial sector that is growing and reforming, especially when thinking about kind of the regulatory framework, just different ways of making sure that there's investor confidence and that there is a more modern and regulatory framework for safeguarding and for financial stability. I'm going to stop because I've said a lot of things already, but perhaps, Lucian, you want to pick up on some of those points and we can maybe even talk about it more. But this report is public. It's available on the IMF's kind of website, and you can read about the results and kind of the specifics.
Yeah, and we'll include a link to it in the segment we'll have on this in YouTube and in our show notes as well. I mean, look, this is like a report card on Saudi Arabia's progress with Vision 2030 and the economic and social transformations that they're making. And I use both economic and social because they're very closely tied, as the IMF sort of hints at in this report. But if you're looking at this as a report card and you were to show this to somebody in 2016, 2017 in Saudi Arabia and tell them, hey, in 2024, in late June 2024, this is your report card, this is where you are, I think that would be welcomed with very, very wide open arms, because it's an A. I mean, this is like an A grade. It's not that Saudi Arabia is finished with its reforms, but by no means is it saying that. It's just saying roughly that Saudi Arabia is on the right track. A lot of the reforms that they're doing and a lot of the changes they're making and the decisions they're making at the top to modernize the economy and society are working, and they're welcomed by the IMF. The location for this press release is Washington, D.C. So they are saying, hey, this is the view from the IMF, and this is what we see happening in Saudi Arabia 7 to 8 years on in its reforms. I mean, just to kind of rattle off a few that you missed or that you may have said, but just I think might be worth repeating: reforms to enhance Saudi Arabia's business environment, and this from the IMF. Reforms to enhance Saudi Arabia's business environment and attractiveness for foreign investment are progressing well. Staff welcomes a recent recalibration of funding requirements associated with Vision 2030 objectives. You said that. The continued efforts by SAMA to modernize the regulatory and supervisory frameworks are key to safeguarding financial stability. The submission of the new banking law to the legislative authority remains a priority. The supervisory manuals and procedures should also be revised in line with best international practice. See, there you go. They're saying, hey, look, this is good. Keep going with this. The currency peg to the US dollar remains appropriate. I mean, the authorities' welcome efforts to strengthening financial institutions will be essential to ensure progress towards Saudi Arabia's growth and stabilization efforts. The financial sector is on strong footing. So this is like really good. I'm so glad we're talking about this for a deep dive, because it's the type of thing where it gets some headlines in Reuters and Bloomberg, and it's kind of good news. But actually, if you look at this thing, this is a outside looking in report card on what's going on. And this was published before the news that came out about 6-7 days ago on the PIF, which swung to a profit of 138.1 billion rials, which is $37 billion in 2023. That's after posting a loss of $15.6 billion a year earlier. I mentioned the PIF. It's only mentioned twice in this document, but obviously the PIF has a big role in the transformation. It's sort of investing for return and also for the improvement of Saudi Arabia in general. Total revenues at the PIF more than doubled last year to $88.3 billion from $44 billion. So what you sort of have here is hey, keep it up, guys. You're doing a lot of the right things. Here are a few things that you could do as the next step. I'm sure that Saudi authorities are aware of that. As our listeners and viewers heard from our conversation with Salman, there's next steps that are happening after the regulatory reforms that are ongoing now. They're not biting off more than they can chew. They're going bit by bit and doing things the right way. And I think when you see a report like this, you just say, okay, look, 2030, it's not the end goal. It's not the end date, but it's a goalpost. And you want to be progressing in the right direction. Whatever happens in that date happens on that date, but you want to be where they are right now. So I think this is great to share, and you should check it out for yourself, because it's not too long, but it's kind of it goes through each of these segments and sectors and talks about each one of them specifically and said, this is what we see. So, maybe work on these things, but on the whole, things are going in the right direction. And I just think it's great that we're sharing it.
Yeah, this was posted in mid-June of 2024. So, it's fresh news, definitely, especially when you're thinking about kind of reviewing the past couple of years and economic performance over time. It's not necessarily headline news because, again, it's looking at the books. It's opening up, it's scrutinizing everything that's happening or that's happened, and that's continuing to happen. And so, if you're familiar with the way international organizations work, this is the type of work that they do, right? They look at what's happening, they look at the health of the performance of the economies throughout the world. A lot of times, the IMF is going in and bailing countries out. And this is not at all what this report is about. This report is like, this country has done so much, has already achieved so much of what they said they were achieving. They're on track to continue to improve. And they're doing better than, a lot of other places in the world. And so I think that that's, one of the things that we need to highlight is that this report really is a gold star for the country, and also a very optimistic, forward-looking report as well. And just one other thing that maybe I didn't mention that came toward the end of the report, which is something I get asked about quite a bit, and most people are really interested in, again, is on energy, thinking specifically about the commitments to achieving net zero emissions by 2060. And it really just kind of talks about how the authorities are really investing in renewables, trying to find better energy efficiencies, clean hydrogen, carbon capture technologies. As we know, none of this is easy, but it's all very, very important for the future of the kingdom and the world, of course, as a whole. So they're thinking about different ways that this might be achieved. And, so obviously there's what the kingdom is doing. There's the IMF's opinion of what could be done in addition to the efforts that are already underway. But for instance, it just kind of lists off eliminating energy subsidies as one particular approach, augmenting the active green finance portfolio. This is something we talked a little bit about when we were talking about ESG. But in general, there is reference to the importance of thinking about energy transformation within the kingdom as well.
It just is worthwhile to repeat the first three sentences of this report. Saudi Arabia's unprecedented economic transformation is progressing well. Prudent macroeconomic policies, transformative changes, including through fiscal reforms and in the regulatory business environment, and strong domestic demand have helped prop up non-oil growth. Spending reprioritization and recalibration of major spending programs are ongoing. Efforts to diversify the economy have started to bear fruit. I think your term of gold star is perfect because it's not a trophy. This is not the end, but progress is happening, and this is what the IMF says. Great deep dive, Hannah. Thank you. Let's get to the news.
Let's get to the news. Yeah, so the first item on the news today is that King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman congratulate Iran's new president. Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdulaziz and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman congratulated the new president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, on his election victory. On the occasion of your victory, quote, in the presidential elections in the Islamic Republic of Iran, we are pleased to send you our sincere congratulations and best wishes for success. Looking forward to continuing to develop deep relations between our two brotherly countries and peoples, and continuing coordination and consultation in order to enhance regional and international peace and security, end quote.
Pezeshkian, I think is how you say it. Is
I don't know
Iran's
what I even said.
Well, whatever you're saying is definitely more accurate than what I'm saying, so we'll go with that. And we apologize if that is not the correct pronunciation. Iran's only reformist candidate in the latest presidential election has risen from relative obscurity to become the 9th president of the Islamic Republic. He won around 53.6% of the vote in a runoff election against the ultra-conservative Saeed Jalili. This is cool because he is a cardiologist and he's a member of parliament and a former health minister. He has very little experience, as far as we know, in foreign policy. But this is according to a recent New York Times piece. He has pledged to empower Iran's most elite and globalist diplomats to run his foreign agenda, raising hopes of a warmer relationship with the West. Certainly, as an American, I would welcome that. And I think what's really cool about this is you have this congratulation going out from both the king and the crown prince, congratulating what has happened in that election. So this is something that directly affects the region and then also Saudi Arabia with its ongoing transformations. As many know, roughly a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit more than that, Iran and Saudi Arabia reached a sort of agreement for a détente, done so in China. And since then, you really have seen a very serious and very meaningful shift in at least the rhetoric between these two nations. Foreign policy and international relations is something that's not a direct thing that we cover on this podcast as much, but it's worth sort of noting this story because the region is all interconnected, as everyone knows. So very good to see this.
Yeah, I think what's interesting as well is that Iran did have the elections after Raisi died in a helicopter crash. In a helicopter crash. But what some people, especially Islamic hardliners, were hoping for was another conservative to replace Raisi alongside the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei. So it's actually kind of nice to see that he is one of the more moderate candidates and that he won and that people did come out and vote. I think it was interesting also just the way it went. So voters boycotted the first round of voting. And then basically they were frustrated by the lack of choice. And it was almost kind of like this rush to get somebody more moderate in. And I think that's good for the region, obviously. So it's I think something that certain segments of society within Iran and then definitely in the broader region are welcoming.
We'll see. He is not empowered in the way that you might imagine because of the way that the government of Iran is structured, but it would be interesting to see if he can kind of steer the ship in a direction that might lead to greater regional peace and prosperity. Inshallah, we hope for that.
Inshallah.
Number 2 news item today, Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry condemns a deadly Israeli strike on a school. After 9 months of war, Israelis are calling for a ceasefire deal and elections there as well. The attack on Saturday targeted UNRWA's Al-Jaouni school in Al-Nusrat, one of Gaza Strip's 8 historic refugee camps, killing 16 people and wounding more than 50 others.
Yeah, this is daily news really out of Gaza, but what was interesting or what's important to note, I think, is every time this does happen, there is a response by the Saudi foreign ministry. And in a statement carried by the official Saudi press agency, the foreign ministry reiterated the kingdom's complete rejection of the systematic targeting of civilians while demanding an immediate ceasefire. The ministry emphasized the need for, quote, the protection of civilians and civilian and relief facilities and their workers, and stressed the necessity of activating international accountability mechanisms in the face of continued Israeli violations of international humanitarian law and international legitimacy resolutions.
Yeah, I mentioned those protests. They took place over the weekend. They brought morning traffic to a standstill at major intersections in Tel Aviv. There seems to be a bit of a shift in the Israeli political environment about the war, and that may just be because of the trend toward a potential ceasefire, which I believe everybody is hoping for. Worth sharing as well, another piece of foreign policy news, but I think it's good to include this because of what the foreign ministry said and the language they use. I think it's interesting.
The language has really been quite direct throughout the conflict, and it's just getting, more and more specific, I think. There's apparently a rekindling of these discussions for a ceasefire as of yesterday or as of, July 6th, 7th. So hopefully we will see some respite soon. Aramco and Total Energies award contracts for $11 billion Amaral project. Aramco and Total award engineering, procurement, and construction (EPC) contracts for $11 billion Amaral Complex, a future world-scale petrochemicals facility expansion at the Sator refinery in Saudi Arabia. A signing ceremony took place in Tehran, attended by Amin al-Nasser, Aramco president and CEO, and Patrick Pouyan, Total Energies chairman and CEO.
Yeah, Amin Nasser said, today we are taking a major step forward in further strengthening the partnership between Total Energies and Aramco with the Satorp expansion project, which I believe is at Jubail, which is one of the most impressive amazing places on the planet in general, but also in Saudi Arabia. Huge, sprawling area in Saudi Arabia built by Bechtel. Said today we are taking a major step forward in further strengthening the partnership between Total and Aramco, with the Satorp expansion project being the latest in a long-standing history of collaboration of almost 5 decades between both companies. As part of Aramco's growth strategy, the project is anticipated to contribute to value addition opportunities in the kingdom's downstream ecosystem, and we thank the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Investment for their tremendous support with the Sharik program to make this multi-billion-dollar project a reality.
Yeah. I mean, you say Jebel is amazing. Have you been?
I've not been. I've just seen it and studied it from afar and know a lot about Bechtel, and I really want to go to it.
I mean, it's not that exciting when you get there.
It's
but
not
it
like a
is
vacation destination, of course, but just one of my best
Yeah.
friends works for Bechtel, and just I know the scale and a lot about it. But yes, not really a vacation destination, but I guess that's not the point. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like about an hour and a half away from Tehran. It's just a quick drive for a lot of people, a daily commute. What's beautiful about Jebel, actually, it is a coastal city, and so it isn't actually, what am I trying to say? It's not necessarily like completely unfathomable that it might turn into a holiday destination, but it's also one of the most organized cities that you could possibly go to within Saudi Arabia. It's just built beautifully, very organized. People from Jebel are super organized. They have one of the best technical colleges in the kingdom as well, so that's something that I was always very interested in. But a lot of factories are based out of Jebel.
Yeah, I mean, it's over 1,000 square kilometers, and it contributes. Jubail alone contributes 7% to Saudi Arabia's GDP, which is just absolutely insane. It's home to SABIC. So, yeah, I mean, it's just like one of those things that just does not really get talked about. It doesn't have a tourism ambassador. It's just a very impressive feat in industrial engineering and construction. So to see greater investment there, expansion, deals between Total and Aramco. I mean, this is something that's going to be meaningful for the kingdom's GDP and bottom line.
Absolutely.
Number 4, a new kiswa, or covering, is installed on the Holy Kaaba. A new Kaaba, thank you. A new covering, kiswa, was installed early Sunday at the Holy Kaaba in Mecca on the first day of the Islamic New Year by the General Presidency of the Affairs of the Grand Mosque and the Prophet's Mosque. The Saudi press agency reported a team from the King Abdulaziz complex for the Kiswa of the Kaaba installed the elaborately designed black cloth cover. The team comprised 159 skilled craftsmen under the supervision of engineers and technicians specifically trained for the complicated process.
Yes, the special work team first removed the gold embroidered pieces of the Kaaba's old kiswa while the new one was being brought to the Grand Mosque from the complex. And the installation is a complicated process that takes up to 200 skilled technicians, as we said, up to, maybe not this time, and craftsmen to complete in a few hours. The complex operational staff included 159 skilled craftsmen who worked to produce 56 gold embroidered pieces for the Kaaba's kiswa. Work is done by hand, and it takes them between 60 and 120 days to complete one gold embroidered piece. A total of 120 kilograms of gold, 100 kilograms of silver, and 1,000 kilograms of silk are used in the production of the cloth. As one piece, it weighs 1,350 kilograms and measures 14 meters high and consists of 4 separate sides and a door curtain.
That is amazing. The covering is adorned from the outside with inscriptions woven with black threads. I mean, this was not on my radar. This was not in Reuters or Bloomberg, I don't think, or in any Western publication, but what a cool story. Congrats to all the craftsmen that were involved in this very special project. Don't have much to add other than wow. That's really cool.
Well, actually, the only thing I will add is if you listen to our episode with Ghada Al-Muhanna Bal-Khail on Hajj, she was talking about how the kiswa traditionally has been many different colors depending on where it came from. So for the, when people think of the Kaaba and the Grand Mosque in Mecca, they think of black and gold. But in the past, it's been green, turquoise, and red, and different colors depending on who was making it. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. If you missed that episode, it would be great to listen to it and listen to kind of the history of kind of how things looked in Mecca over the years. But I just love that discussion that we had. Anyway, last bit of the news for today. Sadaya is dedicated to developing ethical and responsible artificial intelligence. Speaking at the World AI Conference in Shanghai, Chief of the National Data Management Office in the Saudi Data and Artificial Intelligence Authority, Sadaya, Rabdi bin Fahad Rabdi, emphasized the country's dedication to developing ethical and responsible artificial intelligence on both a national and global level. He emphasized Sadaya's crucial role in advancing global AI governance as a national authority responsible for data and AI regulation, development, and usage within the kingdom.
Yeah, Sadaya actively engages with all the international organizations that are out there to shape global AI governance. So they sort of have a play in this and an angle in this as part of a global team, basically, to sort of enhance the governance frameworks that promote innovation while upholding ethical principles. Al-Rebdi also highlighted Sadaya's contribution to the first international scientific report on advanced AI safety, which is a collaborative effort by experts from 30 countries. And I think that's so interesting and good for Saudi Arabia to have a seat at the table by having such an advanced AI body in the kingdom. He emphasized the importance of ethical principles in AI development, including fairness, privacy, transparency, and accountability, and concluded by inviting attendees to the third Global AI Summit in Riyadh this September, which will explore the global impact of AI. I bet that is a super interesting event. And if I'm there in the kingdom at that time, I believe I will be going. So really cool.
Great.
Yeah. Great episode. Really, really good news segment there. Dr. Hannah, thank you so much.
Thank you.